Right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming along today. Packed house. I don't think there's any spare seats, I'm afraid, so I can't fit any of you into any seats, but thank you all for coming. Two quick points. One, you might be disturbed to see that the title on the outside of the tent says 4 lessons, and my screen only says 3 lessons. I know you might be upset I'm missing out a whole lesson, but what I've actually done is just consolidated 2 lessons into one to make it simpler and shorter, so don't think you're missing out. Secondly, there's a lot of slides in here, probably quite a bit of writing on them as well. If you want a set of the slides, just go to the Sosafe booth. They'll scan you and they'll email you a copy of the slide deck. So all the slides will be available to you, don't worry about that. Okay, let's get on. So to introduce myself, my name's Andrew Rose. I work for Sosafe. I'm the Chief Security Officer there. I've had many roles in my career, including MasterCard and different organizations. But the one that's most relevant to today is the fact that I was CISO of air traffic control in the UK for about 5 years, looking after the safety critical issues of keeping planes in the air and how you manage the whole sort of safety and security issue. And it was a baptism of fire for me. I'd never worked in aviation or even critical national infrastructure before. So it was very interesting to see what I could learn from this whole new industry. And I'll share some of those key lessons with you today. If you don't know who Sosafe are, let me introduce you to them briefly. It's Europe's largest security awareness and culture change organization. The stats are there at the bottom. Basically, rapidly growing organization with a very European focus, helping organizations manage data privacy and change cultures at the same time. The organization is very much a behavioral science company that focuses on cybersecurity rather than a technical company that's embraced the human factor to be trendy and to try and expand their marketplace, or even use it as a foot in the door with many of them actually, where they'll sell you the behavioral piece, the awareness piece, and then they'll use that to sell you an email gateway or sell you something on back of it. We're very much focused on changing behavior, using behavioral science, relieving the friction for both security teams and for users to make it a good experience, and actually just really change what people do in the workplace rather than just changing what they know. That's enough of the sales pitch. Let's get on to the meat of what we want to talk about today. So firstly, why am I talking about aviation and cybersecurity on the same page? Well, I think the two have got a lot in common. The complexity of aviation these days is something stunning. If you ever get a look at the inside of an aircraft, if you ever see some of the piping and the wiring and stuff that goes on, it's incredibly complicated. You just have to look at any of you fans of sort of World War II aircraft, just look at some of the old World War II bombers and see the amount of switches, the amount of cables, the amount of pieces they have going on. It's incredibly complicated, and these days it's way more complicated than ever, as you can see from that 2025 photo of an A380. Very complex, very high risk, fast moving. And it's a great balance between humans and technology. This very graceful dance between the two to deliver an outcome that is incredibly important. But what's really interesting is the fact that aviation has got a great track record. Back in the 1970s, the stats were not great. 1 in every 264,000 boardings could result in a fatality. So that doesn't sound too bad, but it's still pretty high. You look at what the stats are today, 1 in 816 million boardings will result in a fatality. That's way, way better. The chances of now having any sort of fatal accident in aviation are so much lower than they were in 40, 50 years ago. And I've done this presentation once before, and that was a week before the Air India crash. And I'll come back to that later, because that was a bit of ironic. But I'll come back to that later. But look at the fatalities per trillion retail passenger kilometers. This chart is what stuck in my mind. When I saw this chart, I saw that and thought, that's a good direction to have your industry moving in. And yet, when I see this chart and compare it with any cybersecurity chart, they are the polar opposite. So have a look at this one. New vulnerabilities identified each year, exponentially going up, whereas this is exponentially going down. The severity of those vulnerabilities getting worse and worse, more and more higher and medium ones coming through. Amount of incidents happening, exponentially getting worse and worse every year. How much is it costing us globally? Again, increasing cost every year. What are we up to on this chart? 25, $10 trillion is the estimate at the moment for how much cybercrime is costing society. And all of this under a balance sheet where we're spending more and more on security every year. Every cybersecurity chart you see is going up, and yet aviation is getting it right. So what are the differences? Why is aviation nailing this and cybersecurity isn't? Well, it didn't come from just training the pilots a bit better. That did not fix the solution, did not fix the problem. It came from this complete redesign of culture, of communication, of design principles. So what are the lessons we can take from this revision of the whole industry that we can embrace within cybersecurity? Well, there's three key ones, so let me introduce those to you now. Blame-free culture, really learning lessons and not forgetting them, and then safety by design. And I'll walk through each one of those now. So first one, blame-free culture. Now, if you've seen me speak before, you may have heard this analogy, but I use it a lot because it's so powerful. If you're an engineer working on an aircraft and you're working on a jet engine, so you'll be working away doing something. Now, if you drop a bolt into that jet engine, you have two choices at that point. The first choice is you go to your boss and you say, I think I've just ruined a jet engine. I think you're going to need to take that plane out of circulation. You're going to need to take that engine off. You're going to have to get all the passengers off. You're going to have to disturb our schedule for the whole day. You're probably going to have to put people in hotels. It's going to ruin our statistics for the month. Yeah, it's probably just cost a couple of £1 million worth of damage there. So that's option one. And option two is you don't say anything. So obviously we want them to choose option one every time, because the alternative can be as scary as that or even worse. So you have to make sure that people are willing to admit and speak up when things go wrong, even if they caused it. Now, has anybody in this room heard of a concept called just culture? Nobody? Okay. So have a look at just culture. Now, I've put together this flowchart, but basically what just culture is, it's used in a lot of healthcare and a lot of safety regulatory organizations. It's a way of not shooting the messenger. And different organizations and industries have slightly different ways of putting it together. But the concept generally is was it really their fault? And so in that jet engine example, if they made a mistake and they dropped that in there, then it's not their fault for dropping the bolt into the engine. It's my fault as their manager, as their employer, for not giving them magnetic bolts that stick to the spanner. It's my fault for not giving them some sort of safety net which can capture any dropped bolts. There should be a better process. There should be a better amount of controls around them to stop that mistake happening. So what just culture does is it gives you a sort of a logical flowchart to think through about, is this person really at fault? Should I be shooting the messenger, or I should be saying, yeah, you're right, that was a mistake. You found a new way for us to fail. We need to fix that. Or is the process wrong? Did the process and the policy actually not tell them what they needed to do in that practice anyway? So you can sort of work your way through this and see whether actually at the end of it you come up saying, okay, you've ruined $1 million engine. Thanks for letting us know. We'll fix that for next time. Or were they malicious and you actually need to go, okay, you did this on purpose, or you've done this before. And that's when you need to be getting to sanctions. So when incidents happen, you can work to this just culture. And that enables people to feel free to come forward to tell you about risks and issues without thinking they're going to be sort of shot for it. And it's not just about incidents, it's about any safety concerns. So every employee in aviation is encouraged to come up and speak up if they see any security or any safety issues that they think might be important. And so you can see that more and more people, this is from the FAA, I think, in America, more and more people are reporting safety issues and concerns all the time, which are all taken seriously and all looked into. Cyber doesn't do that generally, not very well. We tend to shoot the messenger. If someone makes a mistake, we tend to blame them. And we don't really encourage people to speak up about their concerns. We've already got too much on our plate anyway. So this is a different way of thinking about those issues. So lesson 1, have a think about this just culture. Have a think about how that would fit into your reporting process. So if someone does click on a link, if someone does open a malicious email, it's not their fault. I'm not going to blame you. I'm not going to sanction you for doing that. We're going to help you. We're going to figure out why that happened and be better next time. Embrace failure and celebrate discoveries. If you find a new way to fail, excellent. We found a new way to fail. We're going to nail that and stop it happening again. And if people do fail, it's not their fault. Help them, support them. So people can feel willing to come forward and speak to you. There was an example happened at Reddit, I think. So someone in Reddit actually clicked on a malicious link and then just thought, okay, well, nothing, I'll just forget about that then. Then a couple of hours later, they thought, actually, you know what? No, I should report this. So they reported it to the service desk. The service desk escalated it, looked into it, found that that had been a breach on the back of that malicious link they clicked on, and they managed to close it down really quickly. So then in a matter of about an hour of learning about it from the user, they closed down that breach. Had that user not phoned in and told them, they might not have known for, I think, isn't the average just under a year, about 250 days before you find out about a breach? So that's way different. So by encouraging your users to engage with you and speak to you, they managed to cut down a 250-day breach window down to an hour by building that culture. So that's number 1, lesson 1, build psychological safety. So let's talk about learning lessons, because that's something that aviation does incredibly well. And collective learning is a key part of this. So the picture on the right-hand side there is about a Swiss airplane. So Swiss Air had when was it? It might be actually 1998. They had a crash which is caused by a fire in the cockpit. Now what happened is they went through and they spent about 3 or 4 years investigating this crash and what happened. And they found that actually some of the wiring could be faulty in a certain way. And then actually the insulation around the wiring could be flammable in a certain circumstance. So what they did is they found every one of those planes, an MD-11 was the plane, and there was about 1,500, 2,000 in circulation. They found every one, not just in Swiss Air, but in every fleet, and they rewired them, and they changed the way that the insulation was around the wiring to make sure that incident would never happen again, wherever that plane happened to be, whether it was British Airways, Swiss, doesn't matter. They went through and everybody fixed that fundamental problem. So information is shared to build resilience across organizations, and lessons are absolutely learned. And they're not forgotten. They're baked into regulation. They're baked into different ways of remembering, which I'll come on to in a second. So cybersecurity does not do this. Cybersecurity is terrible for this. It really annoys me how the OWASP top 10 has been the OWASP top 10 for about 10 years now, and it's always the bloody same. We do not learn lessons, and yet aviation has one incident and learns a lesson for everybody. So there's definitely things to think about here. I mean, how many times have you had incidents because you've got legacy tech or unpatched issues? It happens to everybody all the time, yet we don't learn, we don't keep up. So we need to think about how can we make sure that common, regular causes get addressed. Now the India 171 issue, they haven't come forward with what's happened yet, and I'm sure it'll be a couple of years before they figure out actually really what happened in this crash. But a lot of the discussion is regarding the engine power, and that the engine power shortly after takeoff went into a cut-off state. Now they think that the main way to do that is via 2 engine levers where the pilots are. And the concept was, well, perhaps they could have done this by mistake. But that's not really possible, because those two engine levers have a fail-safe on them. It's not something you can do by mistake. So they're not quite sure what happened yet. And that's why air investigations take so long, because they need to be absolutely sure what the problem is so they can fix that problem. Is it a software issue? Possibly. If it is, then we need to figure out what software glitched to make that issue happen. Was it a psychological issue? Did someone just bypass those controls without even thinking about it and put it into that cut-off state? That's a possibility too. Or was it even malicious? Again, a possibility. They need to look into all of those things before making that decision. But there was already controls in place to prevent that sort of problem. It's just a shame that it had such massive repercussions. But when those lessons are learned, when those root causes are identified, that lesson will be learned and that lesson will be remembered. And it's one key thing that you see again in critical industries is checklists. So there's a checklist here about taking off in a Cessna. But checklists are used all over the place in critical organizations. So surgeons use them to make sure that they follow through in terms of doing surgery, making sure that everything goes to a formula plan in terms of making the incisions, making the operation, and getting out again. Checklists are very useful. What they do is they make sure that you have institutional learning, that any lesson that's learned by anybody is remembered forever. It creates indelible memories, which is so useful. And we don't do that in cybersecurity. We make the same mistakes over and over again. We forget about lessons that we learned once, like, oh, not patching Outlook. Yeah, that's a bad idea, isn't it? And then 5 years later, you don't patch Outlook again because something else came up. We need to think about how we can embrace checklists and keep these indelible memories so that we don't forget what benefits us. Another thing that aviation does in this space is that they do find out the absolute root cause. And often that root cause is technical or human, as I mentioned earlier. But one thing that they do which is slightly different is they also consider organizational failures. And this is something that I don't think we do. Because a lot of the time, the failures are caused by either these complex relationships or caused by policy decisions made elsewhere. So a boss saying, yeah, vulnerability patching, don't worry about that. We've got other things to worry about, go and fix those other things. So that's not a technical problem at root cause. The root cause is an organizational failure. And actually what you'll find is in aviation, they take that into consideration. So if you go back and look at the Just Culture page again later, what you'll see is actually some of the yellows have got different colors on them. And that's to sort of indicate whether it's an organizational problem or a personal problem. Because if they're being trained incorrectly, that's not their fault. That's my fault as an organization for having the training being incorrect. Or if they constantly make mistakes, then it's my failing as a manager for putting them on that job where a mistake is unacceptable. Or if I know they don't follow procedures very well, again, why have I put that person on that process if it's safe? So there's different elements to think about where an organization can be to blame rather than the individual. And again, within aviation, those lessons are learned. You remember that and you change the organization. You put pressure on the organization to change through regulation, through scrutiny and oversight. So, second of our 3 lessons. Treat every incident and near miss as a real issue. Formalize significance, I say. Learn those lessons because it's so different in safety critical organizations. They have a very formalized post-incident review and lessons learned process. And those lessons learned are absolutely focused on and stuck to and delivered. In cyber, we tend to sort of forget them quite quickly. And we'll say, oh yeah, we probably should have patched, shouldn't we? Then the next day we won't patch. We probably should have trained our people, and then the next day we don't train our people. In safety critical organizations, it does not happen like that. Create indelible memories, checklists will help prevent reoccurrence, and also think about fixing the system, not just the operator. Don't blame the individual, look for what caused that individual to make that choice. Okay, on time, I think. So that's lesson 2. Let's go on to lesson 3, which is safety by design, building safety into the whole design process. Now, they do the normal things, the traditional resilience that you would expect to see. So that's like, backups and power resilience and all that sort of stuff, dual network routing. All that stuff is in there, absolutely. But there's other elements they embrace by default as well. So one of them in air traffic control was overstaffing. So we knew we needed 20 air traffic controllers for a shift. We would invite in about 24, and then 4 of them we'd send home. Because we knew that if somebody phoned in sick, or somebody couldn't make it because there was traffic, you do not want to overload the people that are there. So you always build in some contingency. Now, I worry that in today's technical age, we've lost that. We've lost all that resilience. In fact, it's probably encouraged to lose resilience. We now have concepts like lean, where it's all about the business being as lean as possible, stroke pulling out every piece of waste. And while I see that from a business perspective, it's pretty crappy from a resilience perspective, because when something happens, where's the fat? Where's the ability to cope with that incident, that blip of activity? We just don't have it. And so I think that when we look at systems like lean and quality control systems, they can actually be stripping out resilience. And you should start to think about having those conversations with managers about actually we need to keep some fat in the system to cope with system issues. Segregation, hugely important, very highly segregated networks. If you have a blast over here, it's not going to affect all the rest of the network. So containing those the incident, if you do have one, segregated as possible. System B architecture is wonderful, but honestly, it's not really affordable for most people. The concept for System B, as the prime example is the key thing to keep a plane safe is being able to speak to the pilot. If you can speak to the pilot, you can manage 99.9% of situations. If you can't speak to the pilot, you are screwed. So that's the most important system. So what they do is they have a whole radio system to speak to the pilots. The problem is they have to worry about it. Okay, well, what happens if there's a systemic failure in this technology stack? What happens if something happens, the whole thing collapses and can't work? There's no point having resilience or dual routing if actually the fundamental technology fails. So what they do is they build a system B. They build a second system on different architectural principles using different software, and they have that in parallel, waiting to be used just in case the first system collapses. It's stupidly expensive. It means you've got to keep a whole system running, which you'll hopefully never use. You've got to have staff that sit there maintaining a system that you'll never use. But it does make sure that safety is there. And if that first system A fails, you're still good. And then graceful deterioration. Know how your systems fail. Test them to the extent that you can see what a failure looks like and you understand all the steps of that failure. So you know at what point you need to intervene and how you can sort of shift in to sort of stop it getting any worse, or how you move across to the second system. Know how it deteriorates rather than just being surprised when it falls over. IT doesn't do any of this really. I think service continuity is just, that's a different department. They look after service continuity. So I don't think things are wedded together properly. And also we do create these super technical, fragile stacks of technology. I'm sure you've all seen the XKCD cartoon with a big stack of modern technology and it's all hanging on one tiny piece at the bottom. That's what we build every day. Complex technical stacks that are fragile and interdependent. If one thing fails, the whole thing falls over. Not how it's done in safety critical organizations. Also, we keep people in the center of the design. There's a reason there's a pilot in your plane. He's not really required, frankly. Autopilot could take your plane off, fly it where it wants to go, and land it, no problem at all. Same is true of air traffic controllers. They're not really required. A computer can do that four-dimensional modeling much better than an air traffic controller can. But the thing is that if it all goes to hell in a handcart, what you want is a trained, skilled, experienced person who's incentivized to get you out of it. If that air traffic control system fails, you want someone who's trained as an air traffic controller who can keep that whole model in their head for 25, 30 minutes and still move all those planes around and advise them and know how it all works to keep everybody safe. What you want is that if the systems in the plane go wrong, you want an experienced pilot who's been in this situation before, who knows how this plane runs, who can actually land it safely. So we deliberately leave humans in the loop, even though it's probably not the most effective or efficient solution. There's lots of other stuff in this, but uses nudges and confirmations and automation. If there's an alert in the cockpit, there's lots of different types of alerts. They all sound and they all look different, so that actually the pilot knows what's going on. They know that a certain klaxon means it's that failure. You don't get just a red flashing light and you've got to figure out what's going wrong. You sort of speak to you guide them. You use all this sort of psychological stuff to make sure the pilot is getting clues all the time about what's right and what's wrong and where they need to spend their attention. Cyber again has failures in this place. We create technologies that people don't understand. And this is particularly annoying. We create systems that have thousands and thousands of failure alerts that we just tolerate. And anyone who works in a SOC will know what this is like. Thousands of alerts go past going, yeah, issue, issue, issue. And she's like, oh yeah, it's fine. It always does this. That's not a good place to be. We're breeding a culture of risk tolerance, which we shouldn't have. So again, things that we can learn from this situation. Humans are in the loop. I mentioned this already. So this is a picture from air traffic control in my day. We did psychological tests on the air traffic controllers to understand the amount of stress and pressure they're under and how their brains worked in certain scenarios. So we knew how much pressure we could actually put on them, how much workload they could cater with before things started to go a bit shaky. So we could make sure we are always in that safe boundary. And as you can see, we took it pretty seriously to make sure they were always keeping the human within the safe bounds of operation. Okay, lesson 3, lessons to learn from this. Think about building resilience and contingency into your systems. I always think that we talk a lot about cyber resilience these days. You know, we've had IT security, then information security, then cyber security, and now I think the common term, or a common term, is cyber resilience. And I think the difference between cyber security and cyber resilience is the fact in cyber security, you'll have a failure, and then you'll go and get your systems back up again. And that's fine. But in cyber resilience, you manage that failure, and you keep on delivering the services you need to deliver. Whether that's banking services or healthcare services, you can continue to deliver those even though you know that there's a compromise in the system. How can you keep on delivering on your value proposition even though you know there's a security issue? That's what resilience is about. You know, with an air traffic control, I didn't have the option to just go, all right, we'll just switch everything off for a bit and we'll clean it out and then turn it back on again. You can't do that. You have to keep operating. You have to keep delivering your service no matter what the issue is. So think about that from your cyber perspective. Keep humans in the act and train staff to make sure they know what's going on and why they're important. Obviously, we're a cultural change organization, but I find that staff too frequently don't see themselves as part of the problem or the solution. Quite frankly, they'll say, well, no one would attack me. Why would they attack me? I'm just a receptionist. I'm just sort of a finance clerk. They would go after the important people. They don't see themselves in that chain of attack that we know absolutely they are. So make sure people see themselves in that bigger picture of the risk that they're facing and that they're subject to. 1 minute left. Okay, call to action. 3 things to think about. Create that psychological safety. Look at just culture. Learn from every incident. See what you can do to make sure that your incident response process has formalized lessons learned that are absolutely stuck to and are revisited, delivered to the board even, and have metrics around them. And then design for that safety. Think about planning for continuity. Should continuity now and business resilience be in the cybersecurity team? Possibly. Possibly they should. A couple of things you can do today. Blameless incident reporting. Start thinking checklists for those critical incidents and those things that regularly happen. Lessons learned, train staff, and think the human factor is so important in all of this. Every cybersecurity control can be bypassed by a human. You put all this encryption in on your documents, that's great. If I log in with the wrong credentials or with someone's stolen credentials, I bypass that straight away. So it all comes down to the human. The human is the most important element in our control stack. So make sure you reflect that in your prioritization. That is me done. If you want to come and see us, if you want to get a copy of these slides, then just go to the booth at the back. You can't miss it. There's a big round Sosafe sign hanging over it. We'll be able to talk to you about what we do in terms of changing culture, raising people's awareness regarding human security. We're able to talk to you about how we've used AI to make sure that people can really engage rapidly with this, and talk about all the different aspects that we have. If that's of interest, feel free to come along. But if you just want the deck, again, come along. They'll scan you and they'll email you the deck in the next couple of days. But I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming along today. Cheers.